Pat, always a treat to be with you. Thanks so much for the time. Love seeing you. You look great today, by the way. See, I'm celebrating Star Wars Day in honor of my favorite Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back. I had to present earlier on a call and wear this. My teenager wanted to take this to school, but I said no. I needed it for a call today. But you and I connected earlier. We were talking about a couple topics that are hot topics for sellers, but I don't think we unpacked them enough. And one of them is, how do we go out and land the whale? I think all sellers are in search of their Moby Dick, right? But oftentimes it can be their very demise, is them going after the whale and doing so unsuccessfully. How do you successfully whale hunt and bring those suckers in?
You know, some of it is just thinking like they think. So in other words, it's pretty hard to go in and convince somebody that you've got something that should be on their radar screen if you can't help them visualize what a better world looks like with your product. And you know, I think it's so much about understanding business cases. You know, when I look at companies, so for instance, when I presented to your team and we talked about buyer negotiation strategy, you know, I really had to sort of do a dive into, your world for a while. So I just, I camped on your website. Of course, you and I have had some great conversations. I've had some other brilliant conversations with, your colleagues at Microsoft. But the thing is, just showing up and meeting a customer and not having done a really good workup, I think in this day and age, and so for me, I always visualize that I'm selling at the C level, because to me, this is when you really have to show instant value. In other words, is what you're presenting pedestrian, or is what you're presenting really good, high grade, fiber, high grade food, high grade, energy? What is it that you're going to do to make the other person's world de-risked, which is really important? You mentioned it just before our call here, and I use the term de-risked. So one of the worst things that you ever want to feel like is that you bought the wrong thing. And I think it's a criminal that a salesperson would sell the wrong thing.
I love that. That's a quotable right now. We need to turn that into a Pat Tinney meme with that quote. But I couldn't agree more. I think when you look at the whale, you've got to look at it very strategically. And I can tell you, I've been doing this thing they call social selling, digital selling for about a decade. When I started doing it, it was an anomaly. Everybody just said, oh, Carson's out there doing his thing on LinkedIn. They didn't really understand it. But then eventually I had results to back it up, because it was a process and it was people-centric and it was focused on creating relationships that didn't exist otherwise. You hit the nail on the head, Pat, because it comes down to, you've got to sell to the C-suite. But how do you do that? First off, you've got to figure out and consider your audience. Who are the key executives that you're going to need in the boat with you in order to get the decision made? You've got to understand their process. And I'm probably going to inadvertently or advertently quote your book multiple times throughout this process, because the other thing that I think is critical as you embark on doing this, you got to understand where your competition is. Something that I cling to and I preach to my teams constantly, that you talk about in your books, is doing a SWOT analysis of your competition. Because granted, your customer selected the competition for valid reasons. There were strengths that they exhibited, but where are they weak? Where are their opportunities and threats? And where are you strong where a competitor is weak? What we're seeing more and more in today's day and age as well, and especially in the game I operate in, is there can be and there are often multiple vendors that customers work with. And so you have the ability to start encroaching on some of that investment. So you've got to be very cognizant of the environment, but also that executive audience.
Yeah, I agree with you. As mentioned off air before we came on, I had a gentleman up to my home base, the center of the sales universe in Bancroft, Ontario. And we did a half-day strategic planning session. And what I did with this gentleman was I spent a lot of time refining in his mind the space that he wanted to really dig into. So, we took out a lot of the bottom feeders, and there's a few that are so large that in his particular niche that it's just, the sale would be really long. Anything consultative, anything that's soft, anything that's services related, has a tendency to take a little bit of time to get sticky in organizations. So, what you have to do is you have to be so tuned in to that competitive set that, you can say, all right, so we're not just differentiators. We have a super point of difference. And here is our super point of difference. And I think a lot of people just don't get that, because, if you go and you say, well, geez, I didn't get the sale because of X. No, you probably didn't get the sale because, you didn't present correctly. You probably didn't get the sale because you didn't present such an opportunity for the person who is, listening to you. And when you're talking to somebody in the C-suite, by the way, when I was coaching this gentleman, I said, when you set up that call with this person, because he was going after the C-suite crowd, I said, ask for 11 minutes.
Why 11 minutes? Pat?
Yeah, because it makes so much sense.
Yeah, it stands
out. I hate round numbers. I'm sorry, hate is a bad word. I really dislike.
In fact, if you use round numbers, I often find it almost reduces the perception of credibility. I don't use round numbers either.
Ever. My son was born on Friday the 13th, on purpose.
You just like to spit in the face of the superstition, eh?
Yeah, I don't believe in it. It's kind of a weird thing. I guess it's just the way that my life has been shaped. And all of the things that I've accomplished that I never dreamed I would do, the size of my deal book, for instance, the size of, the audience that, that you and I speak to, just thinking more about being approachable. If you have all these schisms that you have on the left, you're eliminating people.
Right.
And I don't get it. It's kind of funny. We're going to go a little bit off topic here. I hope you don't mind. But, communication right now, to me, is so critical. People right now, they've been polarized for a variety of reasons. And not all of them political, by the way. We've seen, we're running around like a bunch of, it looks like a squirrel convention. They're running all over the place. But, I think you have to be prepared to engage people, really instantaneously. And I've heard a few guys on the, authorial, planet sort of say, well, things like elevator speeches are dead and that kind of stuff. Don't eliminate tools. Don't do that. And be prepared for the opportunity. And the other thing is approachability. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they kept saying, geez, you seem to be really well read on that and really well read in this. And I just sort of said, no, don't think about it that way. Think about approachability. Because if you can walk in and look very approachable to somebody in the senior suite, then they're going to give you more time.
Right.
Look them in the eyes. Like, I'm reading a book right now on body language, and I've always been pretty good at it. As a matter of fact, it was, so I've had the industrial 350 ugly questions test. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's the really bad one. But after it was all over, and I was the guinea pig for the company. They'd never done it before at my company. This guy who was facilitating come down, he sat down, and he says, Pat, he says, do you realize, like, you're just about one of the healthiest guys in the company? And I said, why is that? He said, your tendency to feel fulfilled by what it is that you're doing is really, unusual. It's the scale that you're at. He says, you're almost off our scale. And I said, that's great, but how does that make me money? Well, it took me years to figure it out, right? What he was saying was that, really my EQ was very high. And as we've gone through the pandemic, if I notice somebody's language changing, then what I do is I change my language to accommodate them. Because if you don't, the conversation ends quickly.
That's very astute. I like that a lot. I couldn't agree more. I think communication is at the heart of everything, and it changes and the mediums change. You hit on something that's really important that I want to sit on for a second, and it's not to eliminate tools or mediums by which to engage folks. I usually, when I'm working with teams or making presentations, I really double down on, having a diversified portfolio of how you're engaging people. Your brand and how you engage, these things are going to be very personal to you. You're going to come up with your own process based on the playing field, where your audience is, who you're trying to engage, what's the point of view that you're trying to show up with, because you've got to stay at the pulse of what matters to those executives, or they're not going to take your call. But if you show up wanting to talk about what they care about, maybe with a point of view or a resource or looking to serve, your viability of getting that meeting is a lot higher. The other thing too is just all of the ways that we can communicate now. I was actually recently asked to present to a classroom of students who are all interns in sales roles. And yeah. First off, this was a dream come true for me. I was telling my wife because, first off, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, when I was in college, and I sometimes still don't, but I'm having the time of my life. And it was one of these things where I was able to talk to them about just personal branding, digital selling, and how they can leverage all the resources at their disposal. And that was one of the things that I had talked about, Pat, was how you show up, all of these different ways. These can all inform the discussions that you're having. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, with LinkedIn, and I leverage blogs and videos and things of that stature, leveraging these platforms to talk about things that people care about, like building corporate culture or employee engagement, retaining employees, things of that nature. A lot of the views that I get sometimes are from executives, from customers that my team supports. And really, if there are ways that we can find synergies, and we want to work with organizations that we think align from a cultural or goal perspective, that's how business is done. So oftentimes I can meet with these folks that are aware of some of the things that I stand for before we even break bread. And I think that's ultra important. That is something that we should all give some thought to, is how can we show up with these points of view and create relationships and synergies with customers that we want to work with. We may not know exactly what that's going to look like right now, and that's okay. Some of my best deals, some of my best whales have taken 2 to 3 years to fully form. But during that time, there's a lot of relationship building and a lot of communication.
And a lot of trust. A lot of trust and a lot of little taps along the way that will plug into your integrity. I mentioned to you that, as we started here, selling the wrong product to the wrong person is not something, to me, it's just so bad. I think I put it in the bonus round, but I had a boss who was driving me to go sell something to the Staples guys that I just didn't think was a good fit. And at first I kind of said, here's the reasoning. And he said, I don't care what the reasoning is. He said, go make the sale. He says, we need the revenue right now. So you can't say no to the guy who's going to eventually, sign your bonus. So, but what you can do is you can think really hard about your personal brand and what it means to explain to your children somewhere down the road, this is why I did what I did. You see, to me, the reason, we're getting way off topic here, but it's wonderful. If you're really committed to selling to a long-term, long-process customer, then that's fine. You can wait. I've seen, sales that weren't really that significant take a year, and I've been given hell for waiting that long to get it closed. But the thing is, I have a philosophy around everything that we do in business, and that is you open the box slowly, look inside. If it works for you, then you continue to work with that box. If it doesn't, close the box slowly. Why? Why, Carson?
You got to make sure that they are along for the ride with you. You've got to make sure that there's a comfort level. You've got to make sure that you're doing it at their pace and their speed because you're doing it together.
And you never know when you're going to have to open that box again.
Yeah.
So, I see these people, I talked to a young lady the other day. She linked in with me and So, she was obviously a person who sets up calls, and I called her company, and I just sort of said, hey, listen, I just been tagged by so-and-so on LinkedIn, and I'd like to have a chat with her. I see you're a new company, and so I called her up on her cell phone number, got her at home, we had a chat, and I started asking her questions. She goes, I'm not, like, you're the first person to do this. And what happened was the call ended kind of awkwardly, at least in my opinion. Maybe in her opinion, it was great. Here's the thing. I wasn't an ideal customer for her. The however is, she never asked me who of my friends would be an ideal customer for her. And I think it's one of these really big lost opportunities. It's strange. You get looking at networks and you never know where something's going to happen. So I ran a sales training a program for a person who wanted to target Accenture. And she was in the recruitment business, and she wanted to get some of their VP level, director level people and up, which are going to be really nice yearly salaries. And, the recruitment business takes a nice little cut on that for about a year. So anyway, we got talking about, this whole notion of, do you understand where they are? Are you prepared to engage them at any moment? Are you prepared to engage them at any moment with intelligent dialogue? First of all, when I went through the SWOT analysis to help her get ready, the thinking was that she was going to have to open up an office in Chicago to speak to Accenture. But actually, Accenture had migrated to New York, and even bigger, the C-suite had migrated to global positions all over the world, and they were just getting online with each other to make big decisions, or they might fly in once a half to all get together. The other thing I did with her was a really kind of an interesting exercise, and there was the whole thing around something along the lines of an elevator speech, and she was kind of like and all right, visualize this. So we're on a soccer field, okay. We're not looking at each other. You're there with your niece, and this other person's beside you, and we're back to back, and we start applauding, and all of a sudden she bumps into you, and I kind of bumped her shoulder a little bit, and I turned around and I said, oh, hi, my name's Pat Tinney. I'm the CFO for KPMG. What do you do? She went, and it was in that very second she just went, oh man, now I get it. I get it.
Sometimes we've just got to take a step back and realize, back to your point around communication, I think even when we're asked to do something maybe that we don't necessarily believe in, or there's conflicting messages coming from leadership, I always pride myself. I like to call myself a noble knight of the selling game. I think it's my job and my edict to go out, create these relationships, develop that foundation of trust and transparency. And there's a lot of levers. There's a lot of sometimes very complex elements. And I know you and I have talked before about like how you can de-risk and make these things less complicated. But I think it's our job as sellers to make sure that we go out and we help our customers wade through sometimes the murk and the mire to really understand, how can I best serve you? How can I best add value for you? I've gone so far as to introduce customers to my competition in certain situations because it was the right thing to do in that case. It wasn't a situation where I could help them. But on the flip side of that, now I'm a trusted advisor for them. They know that I'm going to shoot them straight. I can help them navigate through some of the complicated elements of investments that we can make, valued resources that we can bring to bear. And if I can do that, and they know that in every circumstance, they can share what looks like a win to them, and I'm going to do everything that I can to deliver a win to them. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that deliver wins for us.
Do you know what? So really what you brought into light is the whole notion of selling with lower self-interest. And I mean this from the perspective of being open to what it is that they need, not what it is that the company says, all right, we got to make X number on the core. Now I've been there. I've sold on straight commission, a couple of times in my career, and so I know what it is when somebody says, all right, so we got 5 days left, reel everything in you can. But when you're working in the corporate world, it doesn't work that way. Strangely enough, though, we almost missed, if you can believe it, we almost missed, or we did miss a quarter, I think, in one particular case, because we missed it by, it's like to me it was like a silly number. It was $20,000, and I'm sitting in with the senior management team, and we're kind of going around the table, what's happening to you, and then finally we get to the EVP, and he says, darn, we were close. I said, what does that mean? Well, he says, we missed it by about 20 grand. I went, no, don't say that. Like, wouldn't we have known like a week before that we were running really tight? Well, you know how things go. Anyway, long story short was, I said, I could have made a couple of calls and got that $20,000 and just said, send me the check, tell me what you want and you get it, because we got to take care of the team here. This is making sure that everybody gets paid out.
Right.
You know, and he looked at me and he said, don't be silly, Pat. He said, you could never get $20,000 with a phone call. You know what he didn't know about Toronto? I can make 2 or 3 of those phone calls and I would have got them right away.
I bet. I believe it. The best relationship I ever had with a customer was very similar to that, where the team, I no longer supported this customer, and they were challenged in getting this deal done, and it had stalled for a few months. And they called me in, kind of gave me carte blanche to go in because I had this relationship with the executive. We sat down in a room for 45 minutes, got the deal done, and it was a win for everybody. That's what it's all about, where they can share what looks like a win to them, where they need to be. You know, he had some budgetary numbers he had to meet, but he didn't care what the deal looked like as long as we could meet him where he was. So I constructed it in a way that was a win for the team. Everybody goes home in a limousine. That's what it's all about.
Totally, you know, it's totally about the trust thing. I'll tell you how far the trust thing goes. A friend of mine, dear friend of mine, he was my largest customer. He retired, you know, around the time I did. I left the corporate world when I was 49. I wanted to go off and play Pat Tinney and have fun. So anyway, they didn't have any children. And he was over in Croatia, so he owned a place in Croatia, one in Toronto and one in Florida. He'd done quite well. And he had a heart attack and died. And I went to his funeral. I was one of the very few there from his industry and my industry. He was in retail and I was in the media business. And I talked to his wife and we talked afterwards. And I kept in touch with her. And she said to me, she said, this was going to happen. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, Steve always said, you don't have to worry about anything, Madenka. Her name was Madenka, because my friends will take care of you. But Steve never told that to me.
That's powerful.
That's powerful. You know, and the reason it's powerful was that she was kind enough to share it. And I think it was important for me to make sure that my friend's family was honored and taken care of. He wasn't a customer. He was a great friend who happened to be a customer.
That's amazing. I mean, that's really what it's all about. You never know where customers are going to go. And I think that's why it's so important that you invest in the relationship first in whatever way you can. I've had many situations where, you know, I've come in, made a relationship with an executive. They couldn't necessarily do business with me that day, that month, that quarter, that year. Maybe things change in that organization, or they move to another organization. And now guess what? Because you've invested in that relationship, it bears fruit. You can only control the seeds you plant. You never can control when they bear a harvest. And I think that's what we've got to be very cognizant of as we focus on investing in these relationships, communication, how responsive we are, and how much we serve.
I think you're right on, and you know, it's kind of we're actually kind of repackaging each other's message here. You talk about seeds, and you never know when they're going to pop up. I talk about opening a box and closing a box very slowly because the box can move. People move from organization to organization. Circumstances change. Management teams change. You know, all of a sudden, you know, you were vanilla last month, but now you're Neapolitan. You know, I mean, look at all those beautiful colors. I mean, look at Carson. He's Neapolitan, and I'll bet you next month he's pralines and cream. You know, I mean, you know, you want to be the flavor of the month. You don't want to be stuck with plain old vanilla.
See, I always pick multiple flavors. I get mint chocolate chip and peanut butter and chocolate. But I get kid scoops. I get kid scoops of both so that I can afford it in my calorie regimen. Pat, we're coming up with a couple minutes left. Anything else you want to hit on before we sign off? Always appreciate our conversations.
Oh no, great jamming with you. It's amazing. You know, I'm going to be hitting the road soon. Obviously I'm going to take the buyer negotiation strategy presentation that I made to your platform team I just think there's so much there, and I'm making a few phone calls. I'm going to be going out and delivering master classes as well. I've been doing them online. I want to do them in person again. It's just so much fun. It's so much fun to see people have that moment where they go, "What did you just say? What was that? What was it?" And that's where we work through, blockers that people have, and we all have blockers. And if there's one fun thing that I do, it's that I help people remove their blockers so that they can live a much larger version of themselves. You see, here's the thing, and if I can leave, with anything, you never know how big you can dream until you grow into something that seemed impossible.
That is
and
amazing.
that's where the magic is. That's where you land whales. That's where you do, somebody will call you and say, "Well, no, you can't do that. You got to get in the box." And I just look at those people kind of squarely and I say, "Sorry, friends, I am the box."
I am the box. See, you know what? You always like to say that is the rarefied air. And that's what it's all about is, you may get knocked back a couple of pegs, but, you get to choose like when you get back up, how you keep moving forward, how you re-swizzle your process, how you re-swizzle your mindset. And it's all about removal of legitimate barriers to success. And I say that because there's a difference between barriers that we put in our own way. Those are things that we've got to get past, not making excuses and, looking at a new way to solve a problem. But it's all about always trying to find those legitimate barriers to success, knocking them out of the way, because then the path to success is a little bit straighter, a little bit plainer to see.
I think it was Gerhard Schwartner who was speaking to Mark Hunter recently, and he said, there's some research out there that says that 80% of the conversations that we have with ourselves on a daily basis are negative. So you only got 20% to work with that's really positive. One of the things that I often say to people is, for goodness sakes, speak to yourself as if you're your own best friend. Because if you can't do that, how are you going to speak legitimately to people who really need your help so that you're believable and approachable? Approachability to me is one of those things. There should be a score for it because, the more approachable, I don't know if you remember Arnold Palmer, when he would walk through crowds of people, but he had this way of looking at everybody as if he was only looking at them. That level of EQ, that level of living in the moment is so amazing. And so I urge people, please, for God's sakes, talk to yourself as if your own best friend, digest it that way, build a vision of your world and your family where you can look out every 5 years and say, this is where we're going to be in 5 years. This is where we're going to be. This is how cool it's going to look. This is the way we land. You got to land the plane.
Yeah, and be able to see where your customers and the other people that you want to have relationships are going to be in 5 years too, because then you can start planning that together. That's great.
You want to have like 5 beautiful things that are happening in your life where people just kind of look. When Carson walks in the room, they kind of whisper, they go, "He's here, get ready." I
like to think they do that. I like to think they do.
I'll bet you they do.
I know they do with you. Pat, this is a pleasure as always.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Safe travels out there on the road. Love that you're doing what you love, and thanks for teaching us a few things today.
Ditto, sir. Thank you very kindly, and wish you nothing but the best.
Always. Thank you.
Take care.